Good to be chatting again with the member for Grey, Rowan Ramsey, and we're talking about the cashless debit card now that the Albanese Labor government's been sworn in. Social Services Minister Amanda Rishworth has visited Ceduna, and what she had to say about the future of the card, Rowan.
She said they're not going to terminate it in the short term. They're going to turn it into a voluntary card now. My view is that, and I think the view of most people in Ceduna is that alcoholics, drug addicts and gambling addicts are not going to volunteer to go on the card voluntarily. And so we are, many people, I probably spoke to 25 people in the street yesterday out there, and they're all, I think, filled with a sense of fear about what is going to happen to Ceduna. Ceduna is a vastly different place to what it was 10 years ago. It was a fairly wild place then, and now with tourists, the word out, go around Ceduna with your van, don't get fuel there. If you get fuel, just keep going. And of course, it's completely different now, and there's been a lot of work go on to do that, working with the indigenous communities and the broader community. And it looks now like we're going to throw it all down the drain. And it's worth reflecting that we arrived at this position after a state coroner's inquest into 6 deaths originally, and then another death that occurred while he was inquiring. 7 deaths related to alcohol in Ceduna over a period of time, and there were a number of programs instituted, including the cashless debit card, and I don't think many think that the cashless debit card has not been instrumental in bringing about change.
Now, just to clarify for listeners not familiar with the cashless debit card, in effect it's a way that the government pays whatever social services payments you receive, and then they can only be spent on certain things and not, say, on alcohol.
That's right. It's a working age welfare card, so it's not for age pensioners, even though some have volunteered to go on it. And one of the reasons they do that is to avoid the humbugging and bullying as family normally try and smash the cash out, if you like. So 80% goes on a card that can be spent virtually on anything except alcohol, gambling, and you can't turn it into cash, which means you can't buy drugs because drug dealers are very wary of plastic transactions, it must be said. And in fact, a couple of drug dealers, as the best of my knowledge, have left the town because they couldn't make a living anymore. There's pretty broad support for this in the indigenous community, I believe. I know there's people there that don't like it, and just like anything that is controversial. But Linda Burney, who has been there 3 times, has not spoken to the council or the Indigenous Leaders Group, only speaks to people out there who are opposed to the card. Well, and then arrives at the conclusion that people in Ceduna don't want it. Well, I can tell you it's far from that position, and we're very fearful about where we're heading to on this. One of the things that really concern me are the levels of violence that are accompanied with people trying to extort money out of those that have money and trying to do the right things by their families. The other thing, of course, is that we're not just talking about Ceduna, we're talking about the remote communities that use Ceduna as a base, so Oak Valley, Yalada, Kadiba, and a number of Scadesco, and people that will come into Ceduna. They come from dry communities, they come to Ceduna to get on the grog. Sometimes they come in for good reason, into medical service or whatever, but then it leads to this situation where they won't go home. They're off their medication. If they're on medication, they're away from their homes where there's a roof provided over their head. Either their children don't have them home or their children are with them and roaming the streets. And it just sort of really breaks down social cohesion. And the Aboriginal people who live in Ceduna actually wear some of the consequences of this, because some of these people are their relations, so they'll come around and get whatever they can out of them. And of course, it paints it puts tension in the community that we could well do without. And there's been any amount of government programs to try and address these underlying issues. And now the minister is talking about a financial counselling program. Well, I for one just don't think that's going to cut the mustard. What we have found has made a real difference is the cashless debit card, and now it appears that they're going to throw it out the window. I'm pretty disappointed. I'm pleased that the band is out there actually talking to people, but I don't think she has the flexibility from the party to go back to them and say, actually, this is a mistake. I think the only change she's got to work with, well, I've got to try and turn it into something that won't upset locals too much, but I don't think it'll work.
Now, I noticed, for instance, comments from the Green Senator Rachel Seward about a year ago claiming the card is racist, discriminatory and punitive. To what payments has the card previously been applied during the Liberals' term in office?
The card is only applied to, the card payment is to those working age welfare payments like work job seeker. It applies to the white, everybody in the designated community. It's one of the reasons that we were very keen to get the trial up in Bundaberg. Ceduna, Kununurra and Kalgoorlie have higher than average, like the Australian average of indigenous members in their population profile. Bundaberg, by comparison, is around about 4%, I think, so much closer to the Australian average. And the local member up there, Keith Pitt, is a very, very ardent supporter of the card. He believes that his community is right behind him. His vote stayed solid during the election in Bundaberg, as mine has in Ceduna. Around about 63% of people voted for the Liberal Party, for Rowan Ramsey in this past election. If they were so unhappy with the card, they would have voted for the other team. And I think that is the case. All of these cards are operating, apart from the recent extension in Northern Territory, operating in Liberal-held seats, and coalition-held seats at least. And our people on the ground want it. And I'm just so supportive that the government is hell-bent. Basically, people who live in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, telling the people of Ceduna, Kununurra, Kalgoorlie and Bundaberg what they can do. And while our local populations are supportive. So it's wrong on so many counts, and I think it'll be really, if the government goes down this pathway, and they've said they're going to, it'll be really hard to reinstitute it at a later date. So I think this will be a great opportunity that's probably lost. It should be actually rolling out in more communities, not less.
Now, those listening to the interview would clearly take this implication, but just to be clear, your view is that some of these negative social issues, whether it's substance abuse or otherwise, would come back if the cashless debit card is cancelled?
I sure as hell don't say they've all gone away. And no one ever envisaged that this would be a silver bullet. But there is no doubt that these things are far less than they were. Now, there have been a number of studies out there, and the latest one by the Audit Office said, well, there's not enough information to be able to tell correctly whether the card works or not. They didn't say it didn't work. They just said the information. But it is so hard to measure this. How do you work out if an 8-year-old kid is getting properly fed before they go to school? How do you assess whether their home is safe or whether it's violent if that is not being reported? The consequences of what we have done here, the benefits will be paid over the next 20 years as those young children grow up to be adults. And once the damage is done, you can't wind it back. I called in on the sobering up centre there one morning with some colleagues. And they told us a story about a couple of women that had been in the night before. One was over 8 months pregnant, and she couldn't stop throwing up all night from alcoholic poisoning. Now, I don't know what that subsequent child was like, what condition they were in when they were born, but more than likely, we're dealing there with serious ongoing damage for a full lifetime. So anything we can do to to put in those circuit breakers should be seriously considered. And this card, in my view, and the view I think, certainly of the council, of the Indigenous leaders group out in Ceduna, is the best thing that we've ever done in this direction, and they're going to junk it.
Is there something you'll be looking to do in Parliament? I know there's limited sittings, at least till the end of the year, to try and get more of that research done into the impacts or benefits or negatives of the card?
Well, it is exceedingly difficult to measure, and I grant that, and I don't know that enough baseline work was done when the card was introduced. But our options in Parliament, let's be honest, are pretty limited. We tried to get this card turned into a permanent solution for the communities that were on it, and so the 5 communities. The last time it came up into Parliament, that was 18 months ago. We were determined to make it permanent. That's what the communities wanted. But the Labor Party, the Greens, the Independents, the Jackie Lambys, I think Pauline Hanson, certainly Rex Patrick, all would not support that. And in the end, we got a 2-year extension. That 2-year extension expires on December 31. So if nothing's done, and considering we are in a minority in both houses of Parliament, I don't presume that anything will be done. It expires on December the 31st. That's it.
All right, Rowan Ramsey, very serious issues there that need some further investigation. Thanks for your time with us today, Rowan Ramsey, the Liberal member for Grey.
No problems. Thanks very much.
And for those experiencing or troubled by family and domestic violence, there's help available 24/7 on 1800-RESPECT. That's telephone 1800-737-732 or www.1800respect.org.au. The Gambling Helpline 1800-858-858 and Alcoholics Anonymous www.aa.org.au.